Yeah, no one likes my stuff. Well, it's all too tiny.
You got all set?
Yeah, like I don't understand why my brother would wear my stuff. Like I don't understand. Like my mom, I guess, but she never has. Is that mask too big for you? Yeah, because my mom always. I did this. So I went all the way to and I did this. I
Okay,
did
here we
all
go.
the words.
Light, camera, action.
Jeez.
Alright. Okay, here.
What happened?
Let's go. Everybody, right? Like a
Oh,
biscuit.
okay.
Yeah, okay, we're up, we're stretched, air in the lungs. Even James is moving a little bit. All right. Have a seat. Okay, I know we're probably into this lesson, but we're going to pens out, pencils out, pricking our fingers, right with blood, whatever the case may be. Let's see, we did that, we did that, we did that, we did that. There we are. Parties begin. Political parties. Now, political parties are a different kind of animal. George Washington. Remember, this is the guy with civic virtue. His idea was that everybody should simply do what's best for the country. But that's a hard way to get power. So what people started to do was to gather together with similar-minded people in order to influence elections and garner more power. That's what political parties are. Political parties are groups of people. You know, let's mark this right. Groups of people who band together, groups of people who band together in order to influence the government and direction of a country. Groups of people who band together in order to influence the government and direction of a country. And you had people who had very, very different views of what America should be. Ooh, cool, I get to turn my little map around here. Hot baby. Let's get the world involved here. Remember, Europe came over and colonized all of the Western Hemisphere, all of the Americas, and now they've been tossed out of the United States. So what's the United States going to do? I mean, their entire background rests with Europe, and some of them thought, what we need to do is try to become a European power. We need to be the same as Europe, have a really strong central government, and tie ourselves to Europe. And there was another group of people that said, no, not so much. That group was headed by Thomas Jefferson, the group which didn't think that way. And his political party was called the Democratic Republicans. You may not call them Democrats, you may not call them Republicans. They are the Democratic Republicans. Both names are part of the party's name. And Thomas Jefferson, he feared big government. He said, man, we just had a revolution. We just fought a war. People died. Times were hard. Getting rid of that big, strong British government. So we certainly don't want to make another big, strong central government, which is going to dictate everything in our lives the way the British had tried to do. So what he wanted was, he said, the ordinary people have common sense. They can figure out what they want for a government. So Thomas Jefferson's idea was to make quite a weak central government, and then to get most of government power as close to the people as possible. So that today we would have probably much power in the city of Brookfield, and then there'd be some in the state of Wisconsin, and very little in the federal government in Washington, because he said, yeah, it's really hard to control Washington, but it's really much easier to control Madison. And we're right here face to face. You can meet the mayor in a grocery store here in Brookfield. So that's the best place to have government, as close to the people as possible. And Thomas Jefferson said, what we need is we need a lot of farm communities. That's what America's made up of. And really, that's what most of the world did, was farm. particularly the American cities. That's what most people did. You came to the New World to get a piece of land, you farmed it, you raised food. No, a word from the telephone. Hello. So he did not show up. Okay. So he said, we just want to have these farm communities, they can be fairly well self-reliant. That's what America should grow to become. And he thought everyone should be involved in the political process because, hey, you need to live under the laws. You should have a say in making the laws. The other side was led by the other political party called the Federalists, was led by two men, John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. Now, these two guys had very different views of what America should become. These are the guys who thought, hey, America should be like a big European country. That's what we need to do. So what we need is we need bigger cities, bigger trade, maybe some kind of industry that we're going to be able to go and sell to the rest of the world. We're going to need a stronger central government, maybe a stronger military. So they really had different views about what America should become. Should we become more centralized in the government and have bigger cities and trade with Europe, or should we become little, small, mind our own business kind of rural areas where there were just farmers and small local governments? The Federalists also believed that there should be aristocratic, strong, well-educated leaders. I mean, we can't just have anybody show up and be president. We need to groom people to be president. John Adams was the second president. His son, John Quincy Adams, is going to turn out to be the sixth president. And from the day he was born, John Quincy Adams was trained to be president of the United States because of his father's beliefs. There should be people who understand how this works. They should be the ones in government. They should be the ones running things. And we've had, over the course of American history, we've had several cases where there were family members. There were cousins, Teddy Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt who were president, father and son, the Adamses, the Bushes. Let's see, what was it? It was the Harrisons were grandfather and grandson, I think. So there have been a number of different presidents who were very closely related. If you think about Major League Baseball players or football players in the NFL, doesn't it seem like an awful lot of them had a daddy who did the same thing? Yeah. So they had the advantage of being on the inside, and that helped. That was John Adams' kind of thinking, is that why would you look beyond that? Look at the pool of people that have already shown they can do this. All right. This is the snowstorm. Don't know what's going on here.
It's pretty.
Let's move over to all right. So George Washington served 2 terms. He really didn't want to. He wanted to go back and be a farmer in Virginia after the first. So they said, it's still pretty precarious here, George. We need you to be president 1 more term. So he was elected and he stayed as president. But at the end of 2 terms, he could have stayed longer. People would have elected George Washington as long as George Washington lived. But Washington said very famously, 2 terms is enough for any man. Meaning, I just won't serve a 3rd term. That's too much like a king. But that was not the law. That was George Washington's character speaking. And throughout history, there have only been a couple of times when people tried for a 3rd term. No one was ever successful until into the 1940s, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had first been elected in 1932, and again in 36, ran and was elected in 40, and then was reelected in 44. So he actually was elected 4 times as president of the United States. And some people found that awfully scary, that somebody could be in charge that long. So they then did pass a law, and now it is the law that a person can only be president for 2 terms. That's the law. All right, what do we got here? Capital city. I don't know. It's been a long time. to make a place that's not inside any state. Why wouldn't they want it to be? Why would they want the capital of the United States to be inside any state? Why would they not want that? Exactly. That state would think they're the most important state. They didn't want that. They wanted the states to be equal. So what happened is, what was then about the middle of the country? Everybody look up here. After the American Revolution, we had the land all the way over to the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico. But the population was really here. And so they chose something kind of in the center of the country population-wise. Virginia gave up a little bit of land. Maryland gave up a little bit of land. And they created something that's not in a state, it's a district, the District of Columbia. And inside of that, they built their capital city, which they named the Federal City. The Federal City, you can see the outline here. See, it's got all these little open plazas and then narrow roads connecting them. It was designed by a guy named Pete Childs. Okay, not really. His name is Pierre L'Enfant, but that means Pete Childs. Anyway, Pierre L'Enfant designed the city of Washington. And the city of Washington, want in on a little secret? Pete Childs had seen the start of the French Revolution, and he saw how violent it was and how the government suppressed the people. So his design, this is not why it was accepted, they liked the way it looked, but his design actually has the open plazas and the thin roads, because that way the government could put their cannons up in the open plazas, and when the people came riding down the thin roads, they could shoot them with the cannons. Yay! Exactly. All right. But it was designed by Pierre L'Enfant. They already had a president's residence going. It wasn't named the White House yet. Matter of fact, it wasn't white yet. All right. Counting noses. Anybody know what they call it when they count the population every 10 years?
A census?
A census. C-E-N-S-U-S. Thank you. C-E-N-S-U-S. And you guys went over the Constitution. I don't know how well you got into the details here, so let me explain something to you. They wanted to count the people who were involved in the political process. Not everybody who lived here, the people who had a say in the political process back then. So they did a couple of interesting things. First of all the free people, or people who were going to be free, that is indentured servants who had just signed into servitude for a little bit, those folks were just counted. So in 1790, there were about 3.9 million of them. Then, slaves were counted differently. Did you guys talk about the 3/5 clause? Yes, sir. There's a count taken every 10 years to determine the population of the United States. Count taken every 10 years to determine the population of the United States. All right. So what they did was, the guys down in the South, particularly where slavery was so big, they said, hey, we really want more say in Congress. We want more power. We want to have more congressmen. And so we want to count the black people. But if we say they're people, then slavery is an immoral and ugly thing. So we can't really do that. So they compromised and came up with the 3/5 clause, which is each slave will count as 3/5 of a person. And that sounds like such a bizarre idea to us. It was all about political clout. They didn't say that their slaves were human, but they got more political power. And again, this is all just political compromise as to, will we sign the Constitution? Will we agree to become a part of this country? Well, then we need a little more political power down here, because we're agricultural, we're all spread out. So the slaves were counted separately, counting as 3/5 of a person. And then they did not count the Native Americans. And the reason they didn't do that is because They were considered separate nations. You might have heard somebody talk about like the Ho-Chunk Nation or the Apache Nation or the Utah Nation, whatever. And those are different groups. Their tribes were out most times in the wilderness, and they ran themselves. They weren't really a part of the politics. It said if a Native American was living in the country where it was civilized and they were part of the process, they voted or whatever, well, then that's okay, they could be counted. But not the ones that were running out in the woods where the United States claimed ownership of the territory. All right. That was one of my favorite signs I ever saw around Milwaukee. There was a big one downtown for a little bit right off the freeway. It said, what is it, the casino that the Ho-Chunk Indians own. It's like at the Wisconsin Dells. This big sign said, biggest casino in the nation. And you're thinking, wow, this Bellagio and all of the, Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas was a huge casino. This is the biggest casino in the nation. Well, it's the biggest casino in the Ho-Chunk Nation. It wasn't the biggest casino in America. I had a great answer. All right, here we go. So they get their popularity. Why do they get their popularity? Why do we bother to count? No, not for hospital beds. We don't know how many people, right, remember? It is something to do with political power. How's that work? By what? I agree with everything except the word much. It's not how much people, it's how many people. Other than that, you get it. How many people are in each state? So the House of Representatives, the Senate, each state gets 2 senators. The House of Representatives, they get a number of representatives based on how many people live there. For example, Wisconsin has, I believe it's eight congressional districts, 8 Congress people that we send. California is 52. That might change because California is a financial mess. And literally millions of people have left California in the last few years. And they're spilling over into Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and Colorado, most particularly. And so it could be that California will lose with the 2020 census 1 or 2 of those representatives because so many people have moved out. And it could be Colorado or Texas will pick up another one because it's not the state gets represented, it's the people. And so where the people go, their representation should move with them. That's why they count it every 10 years to see how many people live in each state, how many Congress there should be in each state. Well, I don't want that. Okay. Write it down. Live it, love it, learn it. On the frontier, it didn't matter who you were. We already talked about it didn't matter who your daddy was. It doesn't matter who you were, it's what you could do that counted. That's so huge. That's what makes America the land of opportunity. It's what can you individually do. It's not who's your daddy, what background do you come from. If Bill Gates' children are all morons, they'll just lose control of Microsoft and blow their money and all be broke by the time they're 50. That's the way life works. They're not guaranteed to be technology gods like daddy is because they happen to have a father who does that. I do this because I do this on blue in the face. Speaking of blue in the face, here comes Sawyer. Come on in.
Hello, hi Sawyer. You're late.
Actually, if you move his mask, you see that he really does have a blue face.
That's your late.
How's life?
I'm just sitting here, so you know.
Okay, all right, here we go. So this is so important as we move west, as the country moves west, it's who's capable, that's who rises up. All right, John Adams is elected the 2nd president. George Washington says that 2 terms is enough. And he's the first guy to move to Federal City. He's the first one to move into what would become the White House, what's called the President's Residence right now. And it's just fun to say President's Residence. All righty. In 1799, George Washington died. And Richard Henry Lee, I'll be so impressed if anybody remembers who Richard Henry Lee was.
Wasn't he that guy who, wasn't he an agitator?
No, that was Sam Adams.
Oh!
For the what? Yes, he was a Virginian. He did do stuff for the Patriots, but it's something more specific. Nope.
Writer of the Olive Branch?
No, that was John Dickinson. But you guys are speaking around the right here. Last one. Well, he was the fellow who put forth the resolution for independence. Remember that these colonies are to right out to be free and independent states. Well, here he makes an epitaph. E-P-I-T-A-P-H. Weird word. E-P-I-T-A-P-H. Epitaph. Epitaph is saying something in praise of someone who has passed away. An epitaph. Yes, E-P-I-T-A-P-H. Epitaph. This is one of the more famous epitaphs in American history. He said of George Washington, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. Why was he first in war? He led the Continental Army, right? He was our first commanding general. First in peace. He was the first president of the United States and first in the hearts of his countrymen because of that civic virtue that he showed. So this is great praise of George Washington, who was a great person. Yes, ma'am. Epitaph. Something said in praise of someone who has passed away. An epitaph is something said in praise of someone who has passed away. Yes.
Isn't George Washington the only president who's on more than one thing of currency? Like he's on the quarter and the $1 bill?
I'm thinking. No, Lincoln's on the penny and the five. Let's see here. In his honor, Federal City, the nation's capital, was renamed Washington. I don't know if I die. I don't like want to have when I die. I don't have like 20 people who are going to looking sad at me. Okay, John Adams was elected president, and his major accomplishment was keeping us out of war. Because the French and the British were fighting again. The French and the British really spent the 16th, 17th, and most of the 1800s fighting each other. And so he said, no. We don't want to get involved in this. But the French said, come on, you and your revolution, you help us beat the flag if they punch you out of the French. And the British said, I say, we're from the same group, you know. We have the same holidays. Well, save the king and all that all. Help us beat the frog. Well, each side wanted the United States to come in and help them fight the other one. But John Adams was smart enough to say, we can't do this. Think back on the history of what had happened over here in the New World. Time to grow. Look at the population. We had 3.9 million in 1790, which incidentally, don't memorize that big long number. 3.9 million is just fine. And 5.2 million a few years later. So literally the population is growing. Also, time to organize. It's a brand new country. We've got to get mail service and print the money and figure out if our Congress and our presidency and our Supreme Court are going to work. We have to see if this is going to coordinate well with the states. Can we get this country up and running? and then time to prosper. Think about what had happened in this country. You had all the troubles they had with Native Americans. Throw on top of that those 4 wars between England and France for control of North America. Yeah. King William, King George, Queen Anne, the French and Indian War. They'd all been fought on our farms and fields and in our cities. And then came the American Revolution, a 5th war. This is over the course of about 50 years. That's a lot of destruction. He said, no, we just need a generation to grow up without losing their fathers. We just need people to have time to fix their farms, to grow a few crops and sell them and get some money, some security in their lives. That's what we need. We don't need to make a big friend of the French by fighting with the British. We don't need to make a big friend of the British by fighting beside them against the French. So this is what we need. And that was John Adams' major accomplishment.
It's
Doesn't like it.
it's
Okay. Steve, how's it going, sir? Just gonna get out of bed this morning?
No, I'll make it out when.
Oh, okay. There you have a picture of little round John Adams in the middle. And there's little round Ben Franklin on your left. And there's big tall, actually wasn't that tall. There's looking big tall, Thomas Jefferson. The 3 guys that really pushed for the American Revolution, the founding of this country. They were talking about freedom and being subjected to a bad rule by the British and their government. And yet, John Adams, when he became president, did something just, I don't know how to understand it. I don't know how to explain it. Something that was so against personal freedom. It was amazing. It's like he forgot all about everything he'd said before. These are called the Alien and Sedition Acts. Let's talk about the 3 Alien Acts first. So what's an alien? A person what? A person that's not from here? From here meaning what? Earth. A person not from Earth? That's the wrong kind of alien there. Yeah.
Something that is like diverse and is just so different that it's like so like just a different species.
That's a really, forget about species, but that's a really good definition. Something that's so different.
That is
So that's a really good definition of a different, wait, that's a different kind of alien though. I'm looking for something specific.
somebody who's not from the country and didn't cross legally.
They might have crossed legally. You can have legal aliens or illegal aliens. But you have someone who is not a citizen of one country, or someone living in a country who's not a citizen of that country. That's an alien. So you have someone living in a country not a citizen of that country. It could be someone who, well, the ambassador from France, who's living in a nice big fancy place in Washington, D.C. He's an alien in the United States. If you have Riley go over and live in Spain for a year when she's in college, she will be an alien when she's in Spain because she's not a citizen of Spain, she's a citizen of the United States. So when you hear alien, don't think about, this guy or any of the other. Huh? The goal of the Alien Act was they wanted to make it hard to become a citizen. Okay, let me get this again now so you understand. Take a deep breath, don't just write, listen. You had Thomas Jefferson and his Democratic Republicans. They wanted people to live in farms on the countryside, right? And they wanted to put power out in the countryside. you had now President number 2, John Adams, who is a Federalist. They believed in strong ties with Europe and a big central government. They don't like all the people out in the farms. They like the people more in the cities. So this was going to make it hard to become a citizen of the United States. Somebody who moved over here, they were going to make it difficult. And so, let me jump down here for a second. It was aimed at the French fleeing their revolution. When the French Revolution started, it started off with kind of the same ideas as the American Revolution. Let's get rid of the king and everybody have liberty, and then it turned really, really ugly. They had what's called the Reign of Terror, where they said, okay, we got these guillotines, and when we're in charge, we chop all your heads off. If you guys take over, you chop all our heads off, and it was hideous. And lots of French ran away. This is just out of control. Many of them came to America. And of course, where would they go?
Farm.
Farm. They went out to the frontier because remember, if you just cleared the land, you could have the farm. So they're moving out there because the person could get a hold of land, which they couldn't in Europe. That's part of what made America the land of opportunity, is that people could get a piece of land here. So the French came running out. Incidentally, I'm amazed. I don't know how you guys live in the technology world. I completely don't get it. I'm wanting to watch the Packer game last Sunday, right? So I said, Packer broadcast today, because I wanted to know what station it was on. And I literally got like November 13th, 2011, Packer broadcast is on. I don't know why they comes up, I don't get it. So some things you can't find on, I can't find on Google. Other things, I'm amazed they're there, right? The French are fleeing their country. So just on a lark, I put into Google, someone running with French bread. And that's the French leaving. And I get a couple of pictures. They have a race, apparently for women carrying French bread. All right. Anyway, so one of the other alien acts, there were 3 of them in total. One of the other alien acts said the president could throw out anyone he wanted to if he thought they were dangerous. Now, this is wrong. Let me explain first. Making it hard to become a citizen. The United States or any nation cannot simply throw open their borders and expect to exist as they are. I mean, let's just suppose right now we say, okay, anybody can come into the United States, just free open borders. All right. There are more than 1 billion Chinese. There are about 340 million Americans. So let's suppose half the Chinese stand up. Boom, come on over to the United States. Hey, free and open borders. And they vote tomorrow that the official language will be Chinese, that we will adopt all Chinese customs, that will become a province of China. Because they're now the majority and we let everybody in. We didn't say, wait a minute, you first have to learn American culture and become a part of our society. We just said, hey, free and open borders, come on in, anybody. So there's always going to be a gate on any country who can come in and who can't. And what the United States has always done is that, okay, we open and close the gate depending on the needs of ourselves and on the needs of other countries. For example, there have been times when there have been horrible conditions in Africa, where the United States has said, you know, we only took 30,000 people from Africa last year, but let's throw that open to 130,000 this year because those people, some of them need a better chance over here. And then maybe there's been a place where things are, we decide we have enough people from the UK. Last year we accepted 10,000 people from the UK and say, we got enough Brits right now, let's just knock that down to 5 so we can open up this for the Africans. So it opens and closes depending on the needs of the country and the needs of other countries. Okay, so that's the first thing. It's sometimes been in American history where it doesn't take long to become a citizen of the United States. Maybe in a year you're a full-fledged citizen. Maybe you don't want. Then there are times, this bill called for 14 years. It takes 14 years from the time somebody gets here become a citizen. All right, so now here comes Daniel. Daniel comes over from his native Ireland. Here he comes, and in Ireland, he was a newspaper writer. He was a newspaper reporter. So he goes off, and where does he go? He goes out onto the frontier, because that's where he can get a future. So he goes out there and gets himself a little farm, but he's not really a farmer. He's more of a newspaper guy. Well, there's a little newspaper published the next town over, and he goes over and he says, hey, you got a job? They say, well, not really. Just, sweep up, and I can do a few of the ads or something. They say, yeah, okay. So he gets his foot in the door, and then he's a good writer. He's a good newspaper man, so before you know it, he starts writing the obituaries and saying, here, go on, try this out. That's good, we'll use that. Then he starts to write a column here and a column there, and he's saving his money. He's still working hard to get his farm. He gets the money. He says, I want to buy the newspaper. So he buys the newspaper. He's now been in the country 10 years. He's married an American woman. He has 2 little American kids. And it gets to be 12 years. He's owned the newspaper for a couple of years, and he starts writing some things. He says, I think that John Adams is just a jerk. I think he's a terrible president. Well, the president can throw anyone out of the U.S. if he thinks they're dangerous. So maybe John Adams hears about this, or his people hear about this, and says, you know what? You've been here 13 years, 6 months. I think you're just dangerous. Boom, back to Ireland. You got to take your American wife or your American kids. Okay, you got to go. So that's kind of a scary thing. I mean, imagine if the president could just say, no, you have to go, you have to go, you have to go. Think about our country right now today, so divided politically. I mean, would this be a good idea? This would be a terrible idea. And again, John Adams, who was one of the founders of our ideas of freedom, just seemed to have dropped the ball on this. Okay. Adams was a Federalist, and therefore an Anglophile. What does the prefix Anglo mean? English. Yeah, I mean, you guys heard UK flag. Okay, so it means English. Anybody know what the root word Phil means? Oh, how wonderful. You think back on Philadelphia. It means love. Yeah, that would be brotherly love. Dallas means brother. Philadelphia's brotherly love. Philharmonic, love of harmony. Philanthropy, love of mankind. So you have an Anglophile means someone who loves the English. Federalists love the English. So remember, Britain and France are fighting. The Federalists sided with Britain. They said, yeah, we much more agree with the British point of view here. So we love the Brits. If somebody loved the French, what would they be?
Francophile.
Francophile. All right, good idea. They'd be a Francophile. Now that would be a member of the Democratic Republicans, would be someone who was a Francophile, the other political party. And they would fear the English. So they would be Anglophones. Very good. Yeah, they'd be Anglophobic. So that would mean the Federalists, how would they feel about the British? How about the French? Yeah, they'd be Francophobic. Good job. All right. I'm impressed. We get some language skills here. All right. The Sedition Act. I don't want to talk about it because it's time to go. All right, we'll pick it up with the Sedition Act later. All right, cool.
I got drama. What? I mean, like, my throat is raspy right now. I don't even know why. Probably because I'm tired. I didn't even go to bed late.
You turn this off, huh?
No.